For the universe as a whole, there are no differences between these concepts that we perceive to exist. Everything is always completely equivalent to a full state of rest. What makes it possible for everything to be fully equivalent to rest is the absence, the inexistence in the universe of an absolute standard for the state of motion in relation to the empty space. In fact, it is impossible for anything to move effectively in relation to the empty space, as there is no absolute pattern of movement, of displacement in relation to empty space. Every movement is always also a perfect situation of rest in relation to the empty space. The equality, proportionality, or perfect physical identity existing between matter, energy, motion, rest, time, etc. is always valid. Why, instead of the universe that we perceive as locally animated, there is not only absolute nothingness, empty, cold, dark? Absolute nothing exists jointly with our universe. There is no concept in our animated universe that can mean anything other than nothing at all. So, one conclusion about why the universe exists is that there is no other alternative. For the universe, despite all the movements we experience, everything is rest. For the universe, only rest exists. The fact that we perceive everything we perceive, the movements, the variations in tension of empty space, existing locally, does not mean that something material or energetic exists in fact absolutely. At the same time, the inexistence within the universe locally of an absolute standard for the state of rest, or the perfect physical equivalence of every situation of movement with the state of rest, the result of the continuity of empty space, allows everything, the movements, to exist locally for us because everything is always also a perfect rest. The continuity of empty space means that any type of movement is always perfectly physically equivalent to a perfect state of rest. Although we see and interact with an infinity of motions physically, it is as if there is no change in the position of bodies from point A to point B in space, simply because these points are not physically different from one another due to the perfect continuity of empty space. In this way, it is easy to see that the universe did not have a beginning and will never have an end. As the universe is eternal and infinite, we are just copies of ourselves, endless. Law of Newton's universal gravitation. Newton's law of gravitation says that the value of the gravitational force between any two masses is directly proportional to the product of these masses and inversely proportional to the square of the distance that separates them. By relating mass and space or distance in an exactly proportional way, Newton's law of gravitation reveals that these two quantities of physics have a common nature, the empty space metric. Mass and space do not have different or independent physical natures but are concepts very close to each other, therefore they are related in an exactly proportional way. The fact that the gravitational force is directly proportional to the product of the masses, mass times mass, and not to the sum of the masses, for example, reveals the interaction that is among the masses. If the gravitational force were directly proportional to the sum of the masses, it would reveal a relationship between something static, stationary, that does not interact in motion. To interact means to act mutually, reciprocally, from mass to mass. It means that just as one mass acts on the other mass, in the same way, the other mass also acts on the first. The interaction force, the action of one mass on the other and vice versa, demonstrates the existence of movement. It means transference of movement. The fact that the gravitational force is inversely proportional to the square of the distance, and not simply inversely proportional to the distance, that separates the masses also reveals the presence of interaction.